record on this computer. Okay, it's now recording. So what I'd like to do is actually create a Q&A over the coursework and give you some updates first of all. So one of the questions you might have is what's happening to the practicals for the remainder of the semester from now. They're basically going to be drop-ins. So we no longer have, so the remaining practicals will be drop-ins, and there will no longer be a group worksheet or anything like that. All the worksheets are done. Now, if you have, let's just make a note, if you have any outstanding worksheets, email me and I'll do my best to get them all done, get them done for you. But Python, unfortunately, not Python. I can't do the Python. I think that door has closed, but certainly all the Java ones. As one of the students pointed out to me, the worksheets are worth 20%. So just remember, these are worth 20% overall. Not every single one will count. Matthew and I will discuss it tomorrow. I could do, but yeah, that's right, 20%. The week 7 one doesn't have a worksheet. So week 6 was the very last one. Week 7 was basically, okay, let me just, I'll make sure I write some notes as I answer some of these questions. So I can also pop this onto the thing. It is bingo Catalytics tomorrow, yes. So Matthew and I are going to discuss how many worksheets we have, and what he's intending to do is not, I think initially he said he would take 10, the top 10 out of, I don't know how many you do. Yes, that's right. Learning Catalytics is 10%. Week 7, there is no worksheet. And actually the lecture material simply gets you started with the coursework. So if you're trying to work out how to approach the coursework and you haven't even had a look at it, a really, really simple way is to do the Work 7 worksheets. Now, if you remember, hang on, Stefan, I'll just check your question in a second. Give me just a second to get to it. So week 7, the material, okay, and this is, you know, I'll just be really, really straightforward, is that the week 7 uses a smart light bulb, a smart light switch, and a smart building. And there's also a project, there's also a kind of project on Moodle that I used in the live lecture. If you want to start with the coursework in an easy way, then basically take that project, download it, rename that project, and do the week 7 material. There's plenty of code snippets, but it also explains how everything works and fits together. The lecture, the video I did also supports that. And then you just need to refactor your smart light switch into a smart plug, your smart building, refactor it, i.e. rename it, into a smart home, and you've got the starting point of a big chunk of your coursework. If I'm hoping, we're going to leave the remainder of the session open just to questions for the coursework for those who've had a chance to look at it. But for those who haven't, you can literally pass the coursework, get around 40–50% from not a ton of coding. And if you've got your console helper, that's worth 5%. If you just build a main with a class called dashboard, that's roughly 5%. So there's some really easy points to be picked up to bring you close to the pass threshold. What I've tried not to do with this coursework is make it impossible to pass. I've tried to make it so it's easy to pass. So if you're completely floundering at this point, no, it's the Java assignment that I issued on the last week, and it's on Moodle. That's what I'm talking about. There isn't another one, don't worry. Okay, so what I'd like to do is, hang on, Brendan, is Yeah, so Stefan's right. It is easy to pass, but it's harder to get higher marks. And I'll talk about both if you're interested, but it all depends the kind of questions you want to throw my way. And I'll try to make notes in here and post this onto Moodle, or attach it as a comment in the YouTube video, so you can scan these notes if they help. Okay, so what I'd like to do is give over this for your questions. So I'm going to pick my way through them. Rather than just waffle on. I think we've got plenty of material. So I'm just going to scroll up and start with the questions. Okay, so worksheet tomorrow. I'm trying to avoid the worksheet, the 4 p.m. session for worksheets, mainly because it might get packed and you'll end up coming and waiting and not really getting seen. What I will allow, but I wouldn't recommend it, is my approach, is that if you do have worksheets hanging over, and you've done them, right, then just email me for your when you get to your normal practical session, and I'll do a one-to-one with you and go through them with you, okay? So the point is that because the practicals will be drop-ins, there will be no group work or worksheets. So only come along to your practicals if you have questions. So someone asked a very, very good question on Moodle. I'll just get the Moodle page visible if I can. And one of the questions was, I don't think you can see this screen because I've only shared the wrong screen, but I'm just going to post the few FAQ questions that I have straight into these lecture notes. Okay, so this is from the Moodle page, and I will build this up, okay? Please look at question 1 if that makes sense to you. This question 2 is probably the most useful question at this stage. In what ways can I get assistance for the coursework? Let's say I need help doing a specific task. Can I ask staff members directly on emails or drop-ins, or am I not allowed to ask direct questions about my code? Okay, just to answer that question, just to set it out clearly, yes, you are allowed. But don't use email, use your practical sessions. All the staff will be there in your practicals. So just come along. And what I'll do is I won't create group rooms, but I'll create one-to-one breakout rooms for the staff. So they'll just grab you one at a time in the 2-hour session and have a one-to-one and have a chat with you about the questions you have. What's crucial is that they won't necessarily write your code. One of our biggest issues for coding this is this thing about always willing to help, but we don't want to end up doing your coursework for you. And there are some really crucial questions that we have to avoid answering, so we leave it to you to work out a best approach. Hopefully we can give you the right level of guidance so you don't say, oh, what the hell, how do I approach that? There was a question about the starting point for the coursework. If you haven't done that, there is a video on Moodle, which I think some of you already seen. I am happy as part of the FAQ to do smaller videos to answer certain questions if I can't find any other way of doing it. Right, okay, so let's carry on. Yeah, bingo Catalytics tomorrow. I tried to, but learning Catalytics is 10% as I was asked. Should we attend the 2-hour next week? So Stefan asks your 2 hours, which is your remaining practicals. You don't have to come to them. In fact, don't come to them if you're comfortable working on your coursework. Remember, your coursework is your own work. You can get help. Maybe there is a really crucial question that came up with a student who basically, and perhaps I need to just emphasize this because some of you might stumble into this innocently, some of you not. Getting help from your peers, right, is absolutely normal, right? Getting help from, looking back over the material, etc., etc. I would tell you honestly that if you have paid attention to the coursework, I'm reasonably confident that you can get through the coursework basically based 99% on the material I've supplied you in the videos. But anyway, that's just my view. That's what I'd like to feel. But if you get help from peers, here's the thing to note. There will be a checkbox in our grading thing. There is a checkbox and it asks the question, did you get help and how much? Matthew put this in previous years. I left it out last year. But what it means is that some students end up getting so much help just to get through that we have to factor that in. And what it would do is it would downscale your overall grade. So say that you went for the really difficult stuff, but you know, in talking in doing a video and stuff, you know, you're not really entirely sure how you've done it, and we're not that confident, so we get in touch with you and you say, oh, actually I've got a friend to do it, to help me with it, and I'm not really sure. Clearly we're gonna have to kind of cap some of the grade, not cap, but scale it back. So be cautious that if you get help, you understand the code you are writing, you feel confident with it, because your tech report should be yours, as should your video. Okay, anyway, enough of that. Just be sensible about getting, and it's natural to get help and chat to each other and so on. Okay, so let's carry on through the list of questions. Are we allowed to use throws? So Brendan, I think I'm guessing you're using, you're thinking about exception handling and throws. There's a problem with using exception handling. If you look carefully at the coursework requirements, they deliberately don't want you to. The area that you might be the most sensible to have somewhere to catch errors are if you have null objects inside your server and your backend code. But there's a good reason they don't want to do that. Let me just explain a second year module to you. I had a very similar setup where I supplied the code to the students in the second year. They used that as the basis of building essentially an Android app or a web app on top of it. So they had to adapt it. But the problem was that standard exception handling has no place on an Android Studio setup. It doesn't work in the same way. And so the scenario that I'm giving you is to be aware that we are not expecting exception handling for that reason. That's the premise. Because in fairness, I haven't taught it. And it would be, as Alex, when she was going through the coursework, said, it's perhaps a bit unfair to expect students to put that stuff in. Pay attention, and perhaps this would be my key advice. Pay attention to the constraints. When we grade it, we will look really carefully. If you end up adding stuff in which we're not asking for, if you end up littering it with exception handling we haven't asked for, you will not achieve full grades. This is not, I want to add that in because I think that's a good idea. I want to add that in because that's a good idea. This is not that type of coursework. This is a type of coursework that has a clear boundary set on it, because part of the discipline of becoming be good at writing software is to know how to stick to requirements. Okay, so there's a constraints section on the coursework. So when you have any doubts, check that first. If it's not clear, then just email me and not email me, come to the practical and ask those questions. Okay, yeah, so I think this coursework is relatively easy to pass. Stefan, I think you're right, but a little bit trickier to get higher marks. So to pass it, you've got 10%, which is a video demonstration. You've got 10%, which is a tech report. In your tech report, to get that 10%, you simply need to explain your decisions. Doesn't mean you have to have built the whole thing to get that 10%, right? I'm getting through the questions. I know there's a ton coming. There is 5% just on the console helper. Most of you have built one already and been using one in one way. It's 5%. So look, we're looking around 30% on really very minimal coding based on the kind of wrapping around to make it work. So to get it up past the threshold to pass it, you just have to look at the marks associated with the early parts of the coding. Okay, to get the higher mark, the thing I would recommend is the thing that I call optional classes, you should build, right? So a question that people have asked about those optional classes, and I think Nick was one of the first people to ask me this question, or several others have, is that, you know, you have a room object. And so this is at the higher end. So if you're at this moment, you're thinking, I haven't even started, please don't overwhelm me. I'll just say a very, very brief remark about the higher end. At the higher end, you create those optional classes as objects. In your smart home, you would have obviously an array of smart plugs. You would have an array, well, you could have an array, a sensible way to have an array of rooms and an array of attached devices. you can then independently manage each of them. And if you look at the grading criteria or you look at the marks, there's something called system options, which are worth 15%. And that 15% is from 85% up to 100. And that really is all about being able to grow those size of those arrays. The code itself isn't difficult, but for those who've understood what I've said and vaguely remember, there was an exercise I set in either week 4 or week 5, where I asked you to extend the size of an array. Go back to that. That's essentially the hint to help you work that stuff through. So it isn't that even hideously difficult for those amongst you to get the higher marks. The trick is to stick to the constraints. Okay, what changes were made in the updated corrective version you emailed out? Zach, that's an excellent question. And at this point, if Adriano is here, I want to just openly thank him for his attention to detail. It's entirely my fault. I rushed out that PDF, even though Alex said to me, who's my moderator, she said, now, do you want me to look over it again? I said, no, I'm sure I've done it right. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, there were some inconsistencies in some of the tasks, so they've been tidied up. And one of them was, I think, a room level task. Have a look at that. The other one was the indexing. Indexing should start from 1. So if you now look back through it, you'll notice it won't say 0 study, 1 kitchen, 2. It will start with 1, 2, 3, 4. It will always start with 1 based. And I didn't notice it. There was also some language in, I think, task 8, which used the word device when it should have used the word smart plug. And I agree with Adriano's comment that it was misleading, or it would send you down the wrong way. So there are some very minor tweaks in that respect. Nothing that would substantially change the structure of the whole thing. I hope, Zachary, that answers your question. Samuel asks, I didn't think we had to catch exceptions. You don't. You won't lose any marks if you don't. Remember, in the constraints, it even says in black, highlighted, that we are assuming good input. So you don't have to worry about it. Okay, tomorrow 4 p.m. is for worksheet. I don't know who administrator is. No, you can, but it might be jammed. You might be better off just coming to your practical, drop in next week, and sending me a message inside the thing and say, can you just go back through a couple of worksheets for me? And I'm happy to do that next week. What kind of exam-based help can you offer during the drop-ins? Exam-based help. I'm not quite sure, Kobe, I know what you mean. I'll come back if you've added a follow-on to that. Charlotte asks, I had a look at the coursework and thought that if it was possible, putting arrays inside of arrays may be a good idea for this. It is a possible thing, but I would say try to avoid it. You could do it like that. Honestly, I haven't thought of it in that way. People clearly do, but very rarely, because the complexity gets out of control. The easiest way to manage the complexity of having, an array of rooms, smart plugs, and attached devices, for example. And again, this is at the top end, folks. So those who are new to it, just don't worry about this bit. Is probably simpler just to have in your smart home 3 private member variable arrays and manage them from the smart home. But I'm not going to block any, if you want to, just be careful you don't give yourself unnecessary complexity. Just to pick up one point that about complexity, we had a second year module where the teacher ended up artificially creating complexity just to make the students use a certain tool or a certain concept. And I thought that was possibly the worst idea that I've seen for a long time. So I've tried to avoid encouraging that type of approach. Stick to necessary requirements. And one of the necessary requirements in the constraints is to make sure you don't have console interaction stuff in your backend objects. If you have doubts about this, come to your drop-in, check those questions with us. Okay, so Gabriel asked, any way to check our Learning Catalytics worksheet marks? I think Matthew's in the process actually. We've got one Learning Catalytics tomorrow and then one more the following week, which we might do on the Thursday because the lectures will no longer formally exist, although they'll be on your timetable. But I will chase that up. When's the deadline? Okay, it's a very good question. So when's the deadline for this? Now, tomorrow, apparently, you're going to get an email because of all the IT issues that have happened with on campus, they have automatically, the university created a series of extensions. Now, I believe that they've automatically, for our deadline, there will be, I think, a 5-day extension, or 5 working day extension. Don't quote me on that. The email should come tomorrow, and if it's not clear, then please ping an email back to us so we can check and make sure we give you the accurate date. But there is going to be an automatic exchange extension to that 13th of May. As a matter said, 13th of May. Okay, so William asks, what do we need to call the zip file we upload? Is it our student number? Yes, please. William, if you can check with me, if I haven't made that clear on the coursework, I will just amend it. So for your coursework, when you actually come, and scary thought that you're already asking that question, I'll actually put that here, zip. Should be named your student ID, so whatever it is, right? So it's UPXXXXXX.zip. And inside that zip, you'll have several parts in there. Okay. Neve asks, do we still need to come to the Friday and Thursday sessions? That's a very good question. So for the remaining lectures, let me just explain that. For the remaining lectures, there's a question I'd like to ask you all. Essentially, there is no formal taught material from this point onwards. It is all about just supporting your coursework. And what I don't want to do at this stage, now that you've got your coursework, now that you want a clear run and time to think about it and work on it, is that all we do is we support you in that. So I don't want to be introducing any new material. So there is no new material. So essentially, the remaining lectures, except for learning Catalytics this week, and I'll check with Matthew if he wants me to do another one next week, there will be no formal lecture. Now, the only question is that does this type of session, do you find this type of session useful? So I could turn the Thursday, at least next week's Thursday, if you thought it useful, over to a Q&A over the coursework. You might find that's overkill and you don't really need to, but some of you might find it very useful, and you're not obliged to come. So they will change, except for remaining catalytic bingo, no mandatory requirement. They will stay on your timetable, mainly because I haven't got the central timetabling unit to get them removed. But I thought I'd just leave them there just so you're aware if you do want to come along. Okay. Can we come to a practical session? I hope neither answered your question. Alex asks, can we come to practical sessions that don't fall into our timetable, i.e. any of the other day on Moodle? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, come to whichever one you want. If you come to every single one and you end up, you might be better off actually speaking to Shah if you're that worried about your coursework. Shah is not going to come to the coursework. She's added extra sessions to give more support. And I talked to her the other day about how she's going to approach it. And for those students who are really not confident, what she's going to do is basically work with you to build your coursework. She'll sit down and she'll go, you'll work together over it. So if you haven't got in touch with Shah and you're nervous, really nervous and apprehensive at this stage, please do so. Where can I find this document? This one that I'm typing in, Henry. I haven't posted it anywhere, but I will pop it onto Moodle under the FAQ for you. How much is the final exam worth? Oh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I do not know. I will get that information for you and I will tell you that. This coursework is worth 25%. The final exam, I think it's equivalent to the Python. Does anyone remember what the Python one is? Anyway, I'm 26 questions, messages behind, so I'll catch up. How do you write the technical report? Could you just elaborate what needs to go into it and like how to structure it? That's a really good question, Danny. Okay, so there are several recommendations. Because it's only 1,000 words, I say only. What it is, if I explain why it exists and why I've introduced it, I use it in my second year as well, because it encourages you to put your thoughts and your reasoning process down. So let's say that you're coding a bit and you're stuck with it, right? And you spend hours working it out. It's our way of recognizing your effort, that you thought it through. And this is what we do in the final year project. The final year project write-up, which is 10,000 words minimum, right, is 80% your thinking process and 20% sample code, bits and pieces, and the rest of it. So it's kind of training you to think, okay, so what should go in? So Danny asks, what should go into it? What should go into it is your, someone asked me this question earlier, and perhaps I would characterize it at this stage like this. As you develop your coursework, keep notes, like a little log of the questions and problems you solved and the decisions you made. Right? So what you really want the technical report to contain is the decisions, the coding decisions you made, the critical ones, because 1,000 words, you might just think, I'll put everything in, right? And why you did it that way, as best as you can. Now, it will be marked really generously, the technical report, because this will be the first time at university for a programming thing that we've asked you to do it, as far as I know. Unless some of you are doing it in other modules, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Matt Dennis is really keen on improving writing in the software engineering cohort as well. So Danny, if that doesn't help, what we'll do is, I'm sure this is a conversation that we'll have several more of. Okay, Christina asks, for the video demonstration, how long does it need to be? And can we repeat what we've said on the technical report in the video? That's a very good question. Nivaditha, if I haven't mispronounced, offensively mispronounced your name, accurately gives the answer of the length, but what should the content be? Well, think of it like this. The technical report should really be about the reasoning behind your code. You know, whether you used a console helper, a static or non-static, whether you passed the smart home to your console helper, or you work them together in a different way, whether in the back end you had different methods to help other methods, all this kind of stuff. That's what goes in your tech report. It is literally, how did you build it? Why did you build it like that? Your video is you running it. And you can, as you run it, flick back to elements of the code and show that this is the bit that works here if you want to, but there's no obligation to it. It's really you demonstrating the functionality of it. So Christina, the idea of the video is to replace the idea of a physical face-to-face sitting down with you and running your code with you and seeing it run. So it's your opportunity, it's your place, both to get an easy 10%, but also to say, okay, let's, all the things I've built, let's demo it, really demo it clearly. Okay, so you go, so here we are, I set it up, I enter this, as you can see, you can remember, you can expand that console window so it fills up most of the screen, so it's nice and visible. And now I'm going to select house options and I'm going to switch all my devices off. And here you can see the dashboard has now updated it. You can see if you point that, you can just, you see, you do that kind of stuff with it. You might want to, say, flick to your, I had second year students, and although I didn't say they had to do this, it helped their explanation when they flicked back to their code and say, see, behind the, you know, this is what my code is doing, and I thought it was a neat way of doing it. You might wish to do that, but it will push your length of your video longer, and it's not necessary if it's in your tech report. Okay, so Robert, you're saying, oh, nice about something, but I'm not quite sure what. Yeah, 2 to 3 minutes. Glad this is being recorded. Cool. And that's why I'm speaking so fast. Nick, you had that really good question. How's the coursework marked? You have each smaller task saying how many marks it's worth, but how do I get full marks for it? Do you get all the marks if it works, or does it depend on how the code is written? So Nick asks an excellent question. It's a question that we need. The people who are marking it, let me start with that, will be me, Peter, Uchenna, and Manny. I wrote the 3 of them in to mark it. So when you are getting feedback, it might be really useful to you to make sure you target Peter, Manny, and Uchenna to get their feedback, because if they advise you, they're going to also be marking it, right? The rest of the team are there to help, but they won't be marking it. So how will it be marked? So let's just say that the console helper is worth 5 marks. How do you get that full 5 marks? Well, think of it like this. The only reason you wouldn't get those 4, this is the approach, and this is because I'm in charge of this, this is the approach I'm going to tell the others. They get the full 5 marks as long as they don't break the constraints. Right? So if you have a console helper and you end up storing data which should belong in the back end for your console helper, you'll lose marks because that breaks one of the constraints. So the constraints is the area which will subtract marks from you getting the full marks. Okay, so you'll have two issues for you. A, how much you actually do, right? Which bit where your gaps are. So you may not do the system. I suspect if you're nervous still about Java, you might get with the house options, because they're relatively straightforward, you might get as far as the room options, but that may throw a wobbly for you and you may say, that's enough. I can get about 50, 60-ish% and I'll stop there, right? So there'll be a gap of the stuff you don't do. So obviously that won't be visible in the functionality when we look at the video. The other question will be, okay, functionality wise, it all works. Let's just see how they've written it in terms of the code. Did they break any of the constraints? Did they overcomplicate the code? Did they add unnecessary functionality? I mean, I'm just in my mind now remembering the kind of constraints. Did they do stuff in the front end that should belong in the back end? Did they do stuff in the back end that should, etc. Right? So that's what that constraint section is all about. It's, if you like, my mechanism for saying to the team, subtract marks if they break these constraints. And we'll discuss it as a team before we get going, because just as you've asked the question, Manny, Uchenna, and Peter, the four of us will sit down and discuss it. So we're all consistent as well about it. And that's my starting point, and we hopefully will be there. Okay, does a program, Gabriel, you've asked a question privately. I'm just going to read it out. Stop me if you don't want me to. Does our program have to operate exactly like the example dashboard, particularly regarding populating the smart thing? I want to make the room first and then the plugs, unlike in the example dashboard, because I'm planning to make an array of rooms and devices. Okay, all right. So let me just answer Gabriel's question specifically. Actually, it's a really decent question, Gabriel. The order in which the setup, if you look at the tasks, is done, the thing you've got to bear in mind is how it's graded. So think back on Nick's question, right? He said, do you get all the marks if it works done? What happens if you don't do it? If you don't do it in the right order, how are we going to assess it? And why do you need to do it in a different order? There is a very simple logical order. So you may be overcomplicating something straight away. Because I'm planning to make an array of room and devices, so my algorithm design is made as logical as well. Okay, so Gabriel asks a question, which I think I need to generalize, and I know you sent it to me privately. I hope you don't mind me saying it. When you use the words logical as possible and consistent, the experienced programmers here might chip in here. It is actually very subjective, and it's a function of your experience as a programmer to tell what's logical, possible, and consistent. The sequence of the tasks are perfectly logical. It's trivial to want to rearrange them, because you can build your array of rooms. If you think about it, if you're building an array of rooms, okay, the only real difference is you do need to specify the size of that array and pass it into the smart home. But, you know, all I'll say is look at the tasks, how the grades are attached to the tasks, and don't jumble it up, because if you jumble it up, it'll be your responsibility, and you cannot come back and say, look, I lost marks because I didn't do it. I'm not, I don't know if you recognize this when you see the coursework, but I have tried not to bolt it down into you've got to do it as I say it. I've tried to give a logical sequence to how it should work. There's enough, I hope, flexibility to help you do things slightly differently that gives you enough room for growth. And a point I want to say is I will advise Manny, Peter, and Uchenna that always give the student the benefit of the doubt in the first year. My attitude is always to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you've approached something and it's kind of slightly off kilter, but you've got, you know, that we will do our best to give you the better. You know, what we do is I say, it's worth 100%. As Nick said, how do we grade? So you get full grade. Okay, did you do anything wrong? Do I need to subtract anything? That's kind of more of the logic. It's not start with 0. Did that person do this? Give them a point for that. Do they do that? Give them a point for that. It's the other way around. We start at the top and drop and subtract. It creates a different psychology for marking, and hopefully Could you make the learning catalytics questions to exam prep questions? So Sophie, that's an excellent question. In fact, what I'm going to do for the exam questions is trawl through all the learning catalytic questions I've given you. I'm going to check with Matthew. He doesn't find that an offensively easy idea and approach it like that. But I don't know if you remember, one of the first things I said was, I want to use as many of these questions for your exam or variations on them. Ready? Will we have practice tests? So that kind of feeds into Ala's question. Will we have practice tests for the exam? I like what Sophie's asked about linking the learning catalytics questions to exam prep questions. Some of the learning catalytic questions were a bit too easy, so I might have to just shift them around a bit, but I'm going to say that the learning catalytics questions will form the basis of the exam. And as I haven't drafted it yet, because I've got a couple more to do, learning catalytics, once I have, I'll try to give you some notice of that as well. Will the Friday drop-in including this week still happen? Well, I don't really want it to, mainly because Matthew and I need to sit and discuss a couple of critical stuff about how many of your worksheets are we going to include and exclude, etc. But Robert, if you're going to come along and talk about the coursework, then don't do that. Do it next week. Do it in your normal time, okay? If anyone's going to come on the Friday, 4 p.m., it's if they're absolutely in a panic at this stage and they need some guidance, and maybe they have a few worksheets that are easy for us to sort out. And remember, it's only Matthew and me in that hour. Neve says, for the video, will we need to upload it to YouTube or Moodle? Okay, so Neve, looking at the kind of ease of use, I would say unlisted as a YouTube video and then the link as a text. It's the easiest way for me to get access to it. Moodle, I don't know what your view of Moodle is, but my view of Moodle is that it really, really can be a little bit risky in terms of how it behaves. Yeah, that's right. You did upload it to YouTube. A lot of you did for your core computing. Okay, Christina asked, should we put the link to the video with the technical report, have it as an MP4, and then don't have it as a file, MP4 file, it'll make your zip file massive. Have it as a link to the YouTube video. That's the easiest way to do it. Okay, let's scroll along. Where do we upload the worksheets? You don't upload the worksheets. If we've marked your worksheets, that's it, they're done. Okay. Okay, you wrote 1,700 lines for 10% plus. I'm not sure, Azamat, what you mean. Okay, 25%. That's the coursework. Nicola asks, will there be a session where someone will run our code like we did with Python? Okay, so Nicola, you've asked the crucial question. No, what we're going to do is that's what the video is all about. So instead of someone sitting there with you, unzipping it and running it all, because of the way that the timing works, because I'm trying to give you as much time as possible. I had this conversation with Matthew, and Matthew said, you know, make them submit it in, what's the date now? Make them submit it on the 3rd or the 10th of May, and then use the final week to do what you've just said, Nicola, which will be in those practicals, we'll run it. And I thought, oh goodness, that makes the students lose a whole week. And I thought, how can I get around this so you get plenty of time to do the coursework and still achieve the same thing? And I thought, get you to video demo it, screen record demo it. That's the easiest way that I can think. So that's why it exists in the way. Oh, Alice just gone and repeated it. Okay. Should we mention our choices in the technical report using ideas of algorithms such as data structures, array and recursions? Yes, you can. You can. Remember, Gabriel, remember how it's going to. So Nick asked the crucial question higher up, which was, how do I get the full grades for a particular task? The only reason you wouldn't get it is if you don't, you know, it's a subtraction logic. So we're not looking for you to pump extra ideas in at this stage. You're only first year students. We're not asking you to do that. If you find that you've used algorithm concepts in order to build bits and pieces of your code, please do it, but don't get into lengthy descriptions of it. Does that dashboard need to look exactly like the example in the document? No and yes, yes and no. Adriano asked a really good question to me about it, about the similarity. Let's just say that's a sample. It does say a lot of the time, for example, it says do not deviate, because Gabriel's asked the question, he wants to do stuff in a different order. That's where the deviation from the dashboard type of thing might really mess things up for you. So the idea is that your dashboard, your visual, your design for it might be much neater than the one I've given, and much smarter. You might think actually the way that the screenshots in the coursework were based on me building it, grabbing that thing from my console and dropping it into the file. I'll let you judge how good quality they are. I mean, I honestly, if I'm being honest with you about it, I'd say it's probably average. UI console design is no major skill of mine. So if you can improve it, make it look neater, sharper, make it, you know, behave even clearer, better, and that means that you polish it up, if you like, then feel free to. The one thing you'll notice about the dashboard is, and I'll give you a clue, is that I had words in the middle of kind of dashes. And I thought that's quite a nice way of presenting stuff. So then I had to, in my console, calculate the length of a line, split it down the middle, subtract a bit based on the word I wanted to insert. I did all of that really early on while I was pulling the dashboard together. So, you know, there's a lot of work hidden away in that dashboard, however basic it does look. So, you know, you're welcome to improve it. And just don't overcomplicate it. It doesn't need it. Okay, so where are we now? So Carrie sounds completely opposite to the thing, to the Python coursework. Okay, I've done the code for coursework. So Robert, you've done it. About what the tasks want and seem to not want and things I've done. So Robert, you need to come to your practical and chat to us. Don't come tomorrow. There are other people who are not in that confident position, and I want to make sure that the people who aren't confident do get the right level of support. I didn't keep track of which worksheets weren't marked. Is there a way to see which ones? Sorav, what you can do is next week, come to the drop-in and ask me. Yeah, that's why I don't, Robert, that's exactly why I don't want you at the Friday. You need to come at a normal practical. The Friday is reserved for those who have worksheet completion issues. And at this stage are having a major meltdown. And I don't mean that glibly, and apologies if that sounded glib, I don't mean it glibly. I mean it that some people have genuinely struggled this year. The lockdown has had a negative impact on them. And I don't want to just pass that group over, those individuals over. I want to give some early breathing space, okay? Okay, Kobe says, kind of unrelated, what kind of stuff do we get into year 2? Kobe, what degree are you doing? Are you a software engineer or a comp science student? Comp science. Well, I'm rewriting the programming one for the second year, and I'm probably going to issue my coursework as soon as you return. And I'm going to try to encourage you to be as creative as possible for my module, because I want people to be able to build something that could theoretically be commercially useful, and a mobile app is a nice way of doing it. So this year I made the mistake of issuing the coursework near the end when I wanted people to be creative. It didn't give them enough of a run into it, but some of the stuff people produce, they produce games, they produce troubleshooting apps. What I do is I give you a basic frame. I give you a whole bunch of legacy code. During the course of the term, we talk about how it works, and then I encourage you to do it. Okay, so will we only be doing Java next year for comp science? Yeah, I think the software engineers don't do Java. I really don't. But I mean, I don't know the software engineer syllabus that much, but what I can say about the software engineers, the software engineer work on what they call proficiency. They've got some really excellent ideas. I mean, genuinely really well thought out ideas about how to make their students proficient. And they want you to come out of the degree with a degree of competence and professional. It's practical. They've almost turned the software engineer into a vocational, if I were to put it, and I don't mean to, you know, sound offensive to anyone. It's almost like they're training you to go out there and just do your first software engineering job. Whereas with comp science, I think they've got some good thinking. I mean, I used to be head of department in a college, remember? So I do understand the value of practical skills. So, well, you know, Gonzalo, you asked, will people in comp science do Python as well? Here's a thought, okay? In your final year project, you can use any language you like. for comp scientists and software engineers, for your final year project, and there's nothing stopping you from thinking like this, right? Let me give you a little advance hint for those who are thinking, how can I get more out of what I'm learning and studying, right? I have final year students doing amazing machine learning based projects. And the only reason that they've got to such an advanced level is because in their first year, they started thinking about it and playing with the ideas. And then they use their second year, the module they have with me, they have with comp science, lots of them built their initial version of what they wanted to do in their final year. So when they hit the final year, they had a whole body of code already to build something much more professional. So, you know, if we can give you an opportunity on comp science of building something that you could post on the App Store, I'd be really happy to do that. I'd love to see that. And you can, Gonzalo, use Python. Python is absolutely brilliant for machine learning stuff. I tell you who you should talk to is Peter Boyd in one of your practicals. He'll give you some kind of idea, you know, as part of his postdoc research work as well. Okay, it's 10:02. And we've raced through a million questions. Gabriel, no problem at all. But look, all I would say is that come to the drop-ins. If you have general questions about the coursework, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I'll post this and this video. I'll put the video into the YouTube channel. And can I ask one last question before you all disappear? And that is, do you want to have this type of group Q&A session, or are you happy for it not to exist? It won't be mandatory. It'll just be up to you, and I will record it. But you may not find it as useful because now, you know, people like handfuls of you already done it. You like the Q&A, you like it. Okay, so next week we'll do the same thing on the Thursday. I will let you ask me the questions and try to answer them as best as I can. Okay, folks, I think that's done. Tomorrow is Catalytics. If we have any quick questions, I'm probably the best person, Kobe. I'm more than happy to answer. I usually can turn around emails very quickly. At the moment, it's got a bit manically busy because our final year project students are in their final throes of their work. So that's eating up a lot of my time, but I will try to turn around questions. And if your questions to me are really useful, you don't want to bombard me with emails, then try using Discord and Peter. That may be a way of an alternative way. I want Peter to get more involved. Let me stop recording before I answer questions about the lit review. Not because I'm going to say anything